welcome everyone. Welcome to Zero Density Live Case Study Webinars. In this webinar series, we're bringing industry leaders to discuss real-time virtual studio and AR productions and elaborate on significant projects. My name is Birim. I am Communication and Digital Marketing Team Lead at Zero Density. Today with me, I have Joe from New York, Jett Sets, and we will look at creative virtual studio practices that they do in their state-of-the-art virtual studio in New York. So hi, Joe, how are you? Thank you for joining us.
Doing very well. How is everybody out there? And thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. We're going to look at 3 different projects, but let's start with looking at Jett Sets Studio. And let's hear about Jett Sets, what you do. Tell us about your facility. Tell us about yourself.
Well, it's a long story, but everybody can see my studio behind me. I have personally been in the business for a little over 4 decades. My background experience has sort of covered the gamut from working in the studio as a PA to working as a camera person to eventually directing and becoming a part of the DGA. And at some point about 10 or 11 years ago, I had the opportunity to get involved in virtual production. This started at CNBC and eventually brought me to Inside Edition at CBS, where I was trained in virtual production a little further. And it basically grew from there. After about 4 or 5 years there, I came to the studio you see behind me. And I've watched the industry grow, particularly the virtual production part of it. So as you just said, I've been in the industry for 4 decades. My experience with virtual production is longer than most. I've had the opportunity to work with Zero Density from the very beginning. And that was a thrill, especially to see what has happened from that point moving forward. The introduction of the Unreal Engine was a game changer for the industry. And Zero Density really made that happen. I was fortunate enough to be a part of that. And it's been great.
Well, thanks. Every client, every user of Zero Density, of course, is very special, but you definitely have your own place for us, for every Zero Density employee, actually. We talk about you as well. We have Joe in New York. He was the first customer and he believed in the system. He saw what it's capable of and he's working with us ever since. We're so proud of it, actually. So tell us when you saw us in NAB, I think, or IB, probably NAB.
It was the first year, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what did you see? Because you must have been working with all the systems in the industry. You are working in this sector for so long. So what did you see in Zero Density that made you decide, okay, I'm going to go with this?
Well, I'm glad you asked. I had the opportunity to work with several other render engines and companies before that. And while they worked well, there was often a disconnect between what you would see as a designer as the set is being built to a final product. There were some things were lost, such as resolution and quality and that sort of thing. And that was always a struggle to make happen. And then the other part of that was the system's ability to, speaking of the hardware, to keep up with the larger sets, the larger polygon counts and that sort of thing. So there was always that precarious balance between making it look as real as possible and preventing any problems within the system and for production day. And I did have an opportunity to work with several companies. And while sets and products look good, they never really reached that point of what we would call photorealism. And that was a struggle for most people to create a set that looked high quality enough. I went to NAB seeking out a company to sort of maximize on these things that I just mentioned. And the idea was actually for me to go out. I had already arrived at my studio that you see here. And the idea was to find the best system out there available where I could set up shop here and begin the process of building my business. And I had an appointment with a company, which I won't mention who, but I looked at their product. They knew why I was there, of course, the salesperson. And the other side note there is, of course, you know, when people go to NAB, as everybody knows, they go to see what the latest products are, who the newcomers are, where the industry is going, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of that too. So it was a very eye-opening experience for me to see a lot of new products, to meet a lot of new people, and it was a very exciting time for me. But while I was visiting this one company and looking at their product, one of their engineers took me aside and said, "I don't think we have what you're looking for." He said, "Go down this hallway, there's this aisle, there's a company called Zero Density. You might look at their product line, and I think you'll be impressed." And I went over there, and it was immediately an eye-opening experience. What I immediately found out just by looking at it was the product looked very, very good. It was a high resolution, very photorealistic looking set. What Zero Density had, like no other, was they had their own keyer that they had built, an internal keyer, which looked phenomenally good. And I immediately called my wife, of course, and said, "I think I found what we need." And it was fun. You know, all of the people at Zero Density were just terrific guys, and we immediately connected. And I, like others, had thought about connecting to a gaming engine, because I think there were a lot of people out there that knew that the gaming engine was, you know, just this tremendous force that had a lot of money behind it, was, you know, world renowned. The realism was being driven within, you know, that industry itself for gaming purposes. And the smart people at Zero Density realized this and built from the ground up a system that was built around it. No one else had done it. It was a what I think you call a watershed moment for the industry in once they saw this. So I immediately knew that this was something for me, and I began my negotiations with my friends over at Zero Density to get their first system. So I'm not sure, but I think I may have serial number 001.
You do.
and you know, and they were very supportive, and it worked out really quite well. And since then we've grown quite a bit. We still stay in close contact with our friends at Zero Density, and it's worked out just great. And set you see on my monitor is was one of the earlier sets that Zero Density built out and used. It's
The famous piano.
the famous piano. And those of you that can see it close enough will see that there are reflections happening in the top of the piano by our mannequin in the back. You know, that's one of the nice things, obviously, about internal keying, where you can get real-time reflections from the talent, you know, in such as pianos and that sort of thing. And so it was you know, it was really a great, you know, has been a great partnership with Zero Density and building the system and seeing it grow. You know, from those early days, it's I think grown exponentially in terms of quality, flexibility, overall resolution. A lot of the jobs we do are in 4K, for example, and that's something nice to be able to do. And the flexibility of their system as well. Yeah.
Well, it's been 5 years. We left the 5 years behind, and since the first launch, we always try to disrupt and innovate and put things a little bit further for the industry and for our products as well. So thank you for sticking with us on this journey. So let's look at your studio and see what you have in there. Well, this is one of the projects, but you can talk about your general studio.
Yes. Okay. So this project was for a client who came here for the first time. Our client had not
Joe, sorry,
Or-
don't dive into the specific projects. I want to learn about your facility first. Let's see what type of clients you have, because this is also one studio for all types of content possibilities. So who comes to you to do what? Let's talk in general a little bit, and then we
Okay.
can go to the project.
Sure. Generally speaking, we really have an array of people that come to us. We have everyone from lighting directors to producers to directors to the clients themselves that will come to us. And the projects really vary. They vary from, let's say, a person that has written and produced his own sci-fi project, for example, and wants to, and is looking for funding, for example. So that might be one type of client that we've had. Another type of client we may have would be, a corporate client that is looking to bring in a CEO or a high-level executive and to produce a video that will be laid out to the corporation, whether it's, an annual sales report or training. We're working on something with a corporate client where it's training for, internal use for their salespeople. We've had clients such as this one who, who's putting together a DIY project for people out there, a book, and it happens to be, as you'll see in a moment, for, creating your own woven projects, clothing. That's another type that we've seen. We've done music videos here, for example. We have really done an array of things. Things for children's stories, such as, puppeteering. We've done a few projects like that for puppets for children's stories. You'll see a few examples beyond what we're going to start with here. But it's a variety, and everybody, I would say, Barim, has a different take on how they perceive the production of their product. So, for example, most people, but not all, it's their first experience in virtual production. So typically a lot of questions are being asked about what is needed from them, how it's put together from beginning to middle to end in terms of, what is needed from them and what we will be providing from them. And so what I normally do is I just bring them through the process. I normally say, well, most of these clients have experience in production. So what they're looking for typically is just a little hand holding with regard to the virtual part of it, right? A lot of them just have kind of conceptual questions about it initially in terms of what the differences are, where they can place their cameras, for example. How does it work with lighting? They'll ask questions such as, how will the talent become comfortable in an environment that, as you can see behind me, you can see on, that you have up there where they're standing just on a green set. How do they become comfortable in, in a scene? And typically we'll say things like, we will do a walkthrough with the talent. We have monitors out there so they can see the live composite of the scene that they're sitting in. So that's one way we make them comfortable with it. We typically will have them do a walkthrough. You're walking from out of frame, for example, into the frame, and you will end up in the middle of this room, for example, and that will be your spot. We'll do things like mark the floor in terms of their standing position, or if there's a walkthrough, we might build a little aisle or pathway by green tape, and then we'll rehearse that with the talent. You're entering from here, follow the tape, and a good professional will be able to see it peripherally, tape on the ground. And if they're doing a walkthrough from here to there, they'll know, okay, I walk about 4 steps, for example, and then I make a slight right turn and stop at that mark that was put there. So,
well, that must be very important. For example, this project is actually a fashion show / book launch, and the models are moving around the studio and showcasing the garments. Yes. So yeah, it must be important.
Yes, and I must say that once these things are laid out to talent, whether they're musicians or models or corporate talent, everyone understands it quite well. They may walk in here with, with questions, but within a short amount of time, they get it, especially when they see themselves in the environment. As I said earlier, we typically will have 2 or 3 monitors pointing out by the stage, pointing toward the talent, and the talent can see them and they can see themselves in the scene. And once they do that, they say, oh, I understand. And you'll see their hand motion. They'll say, okay, over on this side is the piano, over on this side is the door where I just entered. And they immediately get comfortable with that. And through the use of just rehearsing it once or twice and marking areas with tape, they become immediately comfortable. We'll even put markers by the wall, on the wall if need be. So if we have a talent pointing to a virtual monitor somewhere, right, making a gesture like that, we'll put tape on the wall and say, that is your right monitor, that tape is your center monitor, that tape is your left monitor. They'll rehearse it once or twice, and typically they're comfortable with it right away.
You have the same setup for any type of project, right? You have 2 Moses Star trackers, you have 1 reality engine, you have 1 camera jib and 1 camera on tripod. They are Sony cameras, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, we have all Sony cameras. We have 3. Our primary cameras that we use are the cinema hybrid Sony cameras, the F55s, and we find they work great for several reasons. They have, one of the things we look for are cameras with large sensors, because the large sensors typically have good resolution, for one thing. They also do very well in what we call the low lights, the darker areas. So I'm wearing a darker sweater right here. A larger sensor would typically pick up the detail of something darker like that, and they do very, very well. A hybrid camera does well because it can switch to a broadcast look, which a certain amount of people want, or it can switch to a cinema look, which there are some clients that would like that, because with a cinema camera, you can create your own look, something called a LUT, or a lookup table. And that means you can create a specific look for your project or copy a look of something that was created earlier, right? So for example, if you want something that's very high contrast, right? The blacks are really black, the whites of the picture are really white, or something stark in terms of color, you can do that with a LUT or with the cinema camera specifically. And you could even do what they call an internal camera record without anything applied to it, and then you can apply a LUT later on in post. So there's a variety of things you can do with that, and we find that our Sony cameras handle that very, very well.
Thank you. Let's take a look at this project. I want to show the video, and this is a book launch by Shirley Paden, who's a knitwear designer and a teacher. So let's hear the short case study and let's talk about it later.
Creation and marketing boutique. I'm the creative director and owner of a small content creation and marketing boutique agency in New York. I've been known for having big visions that usually get lassoed with very small budgets. I was looking for a creative way to bring my client's production into another level of excellence and to do something that hasn't been done before. My client is Shirley Paden. She's a world-renowned knitwear designer, teacher, and author. And we recently launched her new book where she features 31 beautiful garments that were created by her students in a design-along series over the past few years. Not having the ability to have a live event, fashion show, or book launch, I had to think of a way that would bring the same level of grandeur displayed in the book. I wanted to take the viewer through the creative process of the designer, from sketch to finish. I envisioned the model standing in a mindscape of the designer with the book in the frame in the background. The idea was that the model was the designer enacting the creative process that brought this piece to life. At this point, for me, it became so much more than just a fashion show. We had 31 outfits, 5 models, and 8 hours to wrap everything up in, and we were able to get it. Before starting this project, I knew very little about virtual production. That was before coming to Jett Sets. The crew sat with me and brainstormed until we figured out a solution. We experimented with different looks, different floors, walls, backgrounds, until we hit the sweet spot. It was such a beautiful collaborative experience. We used a Sony f55 camera mounted to a jibby jib like you see here. And on top of it is a Moses star tracker. As you can see, here's the cool LED lights that are built into it. And what this does is there's reflective stickers all along the ceiling. It calculates its position and transmits camera location in a 3D space, as well as the pan, tilt, roll of the camera head, and the lens zoom and focus data. All of this data is fed into the zero density reality engine that creates the background in real time. Just to give you an idea of what the software did for my project, we were able to hook up 2 laptops feeding into the virtual screens and cue in the various animations and things that needed to feed into the various monitors at different times. I wanted the book to have transparency, which would add additional depth to the set. So our virtual set designer created a blueprint that added a control node into the YAR graph that our zero density operator used to adjust the transparency levels of the screens. Some of the benefits to working with VR: you have the ability to move the camera, pan, tilt, zoom, and control the depth of field on a green screen. Specifically for me was being able to see the final image and then wrap up on set and have a final composited image to take home, where we don't have to spend weeks in post keying and compositing. I can't thank Bill at American Movie Company enough for connecting me with Jett Sets. The level of professionalism, work ethic, and go the extra mile type of service I received was just fantastic, and I have a very happy client and great product.
Well, for someone who's not familiar with the technology, she explains it so clearly, though.
Yes, that's true. Very interesting. She did pick up on it quite quickly, and she spoke about so many different things. I'm almost not sure where to start, but I think what helps a lot is to just sit down and have a lot of conversation with the client and to get an idea for, what their thoughts are for this project. I think it also helps to get examples of earlier work that they've done, earlier productions. It's also helpful to get examples of what they're thinking about, even if it's not their own. So sometimes people will provide me with video or even photographs of what they're thinking, or examples of the type of theme that they have in mind, or a feel, or an overall look of of what they have in mind. And it becomes a back and forth process until both parties fully understand what they have in mind. It was a bit of this with Quinn. She came in, we saw the books that had been produced, the DIY book that Shirley had created. That was helpful. We understood immediately the importance of the pattern, and that pattern had to be displayed right on some kind of big screen. And we walked her through a lot of sets that we already had, and this set in particular spoke to her. As you see this star pattern behind them, as though they're on the moon or out in space. And we created those virtual monitors, and at some point she decided that a form of opacity on those monitors would really sort of open the space up a little bit. So we created that with our R graph, with the zero density R graph and the blueprinting that was put into place. And then early rehearsals also help, in terms of getting cameras in position, getting the people, even if it's not, in this case, not the models, but our model that you see behind me, just so you get a sense for sizing, between the talent and the assets within your scene. So there's a lot of that. And what I tell my clients a lot is, 70, and now I'm making this number up, but it's a large percentage, but I'll say 75 or 85% of virtual production is front loaded, meaning it's all in the preparation, right? It's pre-visualizing it, it's rehearsing it, it's looking at stuff. Because when we were setting this up, there were just a lot of really, really small details that came out that we were able to sort of, improve on. The opacity, like I just mentioned a moment ago, the size of the screens, the fact that, we started out where the screens were flat, and then it felt better to sort of do this, right? Or in this, looking from that way, do this with the screens, right? Where it looked a little bit more like a book rather than just two, right, screens up against each other. So that felt good because a book opened up sort of has that shape. And placing them exactly in the scene that felt best. And, once again, it's a back and forth process, but the more you do it, the better things get. And then, creative ideas come out as a result of it. And the whole process just opens up and improves. And I think we were able to achieve that with Quinn and her client for this project. And there's so much more to it. I can speak about it for hours, but the gist of it is the pre-visualization, the what I refer to as it being front-loaded, the preparation with the client. At some point in speaking with Bream here, we spoke about what it typically is in terms of time or in terms of the timeline on any given project. That's always tough because each client is very, very specific in terms of what their deadlines are, right? They know what they are typically. Sometimes it's very short. A couple of projects ago, we had someone that came in and it needed to be prepared within a week. So we had to sort of speed up the whole process in order to make that deadline. If we have the chance to choose with the client where they'll say to us, we can do this in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, the more time you have out, the better, because it just allows you to get it on a timeline and allow extra time in case new ideas come up or things change and that sort of thing. So, but typically, anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks is a typical timeline for us with a client in terms of building a project and eventually producing it on stage. But that does vary, and it varies for a variety of reasons. I mentioned one, the production schedule of the client, but other things that connect to that also obviously are where they are with the set. In some cases, a client comes to us with a set. One of these examples, I think it was the example of Netflix, where they came with us with a set. And so that provides us with a certain amount of the product already sort of built out for us. So that saves time, obviously, but it can come from a variety of places. It can come from a client giving it to us. It can come from an existing library. It can be built from scratch internally.
Do you have your own designer team?
Yes, we do. We have a core group here locally in New York that that works with our clients. We also have a few people we work with who are off-site, and some as far as California, and they work with us. We have people that have their own libraries that sometimes we work with, which is very nice for some clients. That's worked out well, because sometimes a client will come here and they'll say, I don't know what the set looks like. What do you recommend? And we'll talk, and I'll ask for examples, and often I'll just say, well, here's a library. Let's just take a look at the library and see, let me know, or we'll just walk through it, and they'll say, yes, this particular set could work for us very well. and let's go with that. And so we'll start with the base once they've chosen that. And typically when they choose a set, it's not the exact set that they've seen. It's the set in shape and size and scope. Typically what needs to change are the colors of the walls. Some items need to be removed. Some need to be brought in. One of the examples here, I think it's the MAA, where that was chosen from a library, and there were just big changes made to that in terms of what I'm talking about. Color, lighting, textures, materials, that sort of thing.
So let's move on to Netflix's project, because it's a different project. It's an episodic, it's an educational children's program. And one of the benefits of doing it in virtual studio that you can shoot some of them in LA and some of them in New York, apparently. So
Yes.
Let's talk about the project as I play the video in the background. You can tell us how they approached you and what type of things they needed. Did they have a set in mind? Did you help with it? Was it live recording, of course, but did you do post-production afterwards? How was it with Netflix, basically?
They did. So this is an ongoing series for Netflix called Bookmarks, as you see. The set was created, I believe, on their end. They came to us and they said, this is the set that we will be using for this show. And there were certain requirements they wanted because of Netflix. Netflix has a whole set of requirements in terms of how things are shot, how they look. For example, it must be in 4K, more specifically UHD, right? And so that needed to be in play. There were animations such as the book that you just saw behind Jacqueline Woodson sitting there that needed to be, was animated. As you see, there was a page turn there, and we needed to do that live as she was speaking. So we were following her along. As you see, she turns the page, we turn the page. And there were animations or blueprints built into that book that we needed to transpose into zero density in order to basically initiate things like a page turn or an open of the book or the closing of the book and that sort of thing. So those blueprints were built on their end, but we needed to interpret those blueprints and bring them into zero density, which we did. There were other things, because this is a series, that we had to follow very specific camera shots, camera angles. You see how there are bookshelves behind her. They needed to be at a specific distance. They needed to be really set up in a very specific way. So it took some time to rotate the set and move it around to place it exactly where other shows previous to this show that we did here were. So that took a little time. The height of the book needed to be adjusted. The sizing of the book needed to be adjusted. There were things built into the blueprint that we had to augment. So for example, there was a speed. As you see, as the pages are turning, that needed to be set. It was a very specific thing, and our designer that we work with was able to work with us and adjust those blueprints to sort of meet the needs of the client. The chair that Jacqueline is sitting on was also brought in because that's a specific chair used in all of their productions, the big red comfortable looking chair, as well as some of the other stuff. I see a tennis racket and a table next to her. Those are obviously real. Those were brought in, and everything was really very specifically set up. They had a set design person here and others that were in charge of putting that all in place and followed a sort of a list of items that needed to be put into place in order to replicate other shows.
They had the design in another project, right? It wasn't designed originally for Unreal Engine, so you had to
Correct.
take the project and adjust it to Reality Editor.
Yes.
How long did it take? Do you know about your?
That took us a day or two to just sort of wrap our heads around it. It was the first time we did it, and identifying blueprints is a skill set. A lot of designers don't spend a lot of time with it. Others do know blueprints. It's something that is sort of a growing skill set, I think, among designers these days, because more and more people are using Unreal Engine for production purposes. So they have to understand not just the procedures of building a set outside of the Unreal Engine and bringing it in, but they also have to understand how to manipulate it within the Unreal Engine. Zero Density has something called an Unreal Editor that we work within, and a designer has to be familiar with those things. In the case of the blueprints, there is a process of taking a blueprint that already exists and creating what they call a ZB actor within Zero Density in order that you can trigger things like that. And I was actually the operator on this, so I was the person that triggered the opening of the book and the turning of the pages. And that was on a series of nodes within Zero Density, right? People may know Zero Density has a nodal system, right?
Yeah.
And within that, you can trigger animations and that sort of thing.
Yeah, even the key is a node. Joe,
correct.
we have a question about your team. How many people do you have in your team, like full-time, part-time designers, operators, cameramen? Can you talk about your team a little bit?
The team primarily are freelancers, but it's a core group of people. I have, although some of those people are here nearly every day working with me on projects, they also work with me on R&D and other things within the studio, because there's also always something to be done here. But I generally work with a core group of people that I've worked with over a course of years, because they're very comfortable working within virtual production in our world here. They know the protocols, they know what the workflow is, and so it lends itself to a very smooth process, right, from start to finish. Our designers, we have a group of 5 designers that we work with. Typically, when someone comes to me, they spend a fair amount of time getting comfortable with a number of things. The production protocols, working within a production environment, they get familiar with Zero Density, and they get familiar with a lot of the tools that we work with here, right? So it's it's a production, but it's a specialized production, as you know. You see the jib behind me. There's a star tracker on top of that. So being familiar with the camera tracking solutions is very important, even for a designer, to understand things, because there's data that comes in from that star tracker, for example, and even an operator. Right here to my right is the Zero Density node graph. You can turn this just for a second for your viewers to see. And they need to become familiar with manipulating a set. And what that means is moving a set around, rotating a set, moving it forward, back, left, right, etc. But there's also there's data coming in from the star tracker that you need to see, because what's happening is, as you well know, is that data that's coming in real time is allowing the system to know where it is in time and space. And so, for example, when the camera zooms in, that set will also move appropriately, as though it were made of wood, like a real set. And moving around, allows you to do that. So our designers need to know what that process is. They have to know it, minimally general knowledge of how the process works. If they work as operators, which some of our designers do, then they need to understand the whole process, at least in a general way, right?
Yeah. So Joe, we have a new question. You mentioned briefly about the difference with Zero Density and other virtual studio products you've used. Can you tell us the difference a little bit, of course, without any product names?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. The concepts are the same for all of them, right? So the concepts are the same with regard to the fact that they all use computers. Those computers have IP addresses. Those computers are taking data in from a camera tracking solution, right? Whether it's Moses or Vinton or Stye or any of the other many, camera tracking, they all come in. So the concepts are the same for those sort of things.
What is the advantage, basically, not the details of all the differences, of
So
course.
the general concepts are the same. The differences really are in how they process that information, right, in order to do what we're doing here. So how they process that is different. And the second thing, which is the bigger thing, is I think is the GUI device, right? The GUI device, the operational panel, in terms of what it looks like, right? And how things are manipulated and that sort of thing. And I think that's, for me personally, the big difference, because I've worked with a number of them. I've seen a number of them, in process. And I currently work not just here, but in other places that use other systems. So I would say the GUI system is probably the biggest thing for me. And also what I said earlier, how it processes that information. Those things are very important because then they tie to things like troubleshooting. If there are any issues, how do you troubleshoot it? Sometimes fixes for issues or challenges are very simple because the workflow or the pipeline of all of it is fairly understandable. And so you can sort of cut to the chase and figure out where you are in time and space, and you can sort of figure out an issue very quickly. Sometimes it's multi-phased and there's a lot of stuff to it. And so you have your process of elimination and finding an issue takes more time because of that. The GUI issue also ties to this a little bit, but it also ties to the ease of use for an operator during a project. The ease of use to get to something and to make a change is sometimes more complicated for some systems and sometimes much less complicated. What I like about zero density is the pipeline that they built that I just showed you a moment ago is very straightforward, and it follows a simple pipeline that you would see on a simple schematic in terms of a signal flow, right? Camera signal coming in, tracking information coming in, Genlock coming in, and you can see it rather easily, within the zero density pipeline. And that's a very nice thing to be able to see because it allows you to manipulate things much easier, troubleshoot much easier if you need to. And then there's the creative process with all of that too. So if someone wants to do something creative, in the example that we saw in the first video with Quinn's project and making a screen somewhat transparent, it's an easy thing to do. In zero density, you can add things like color correctors, right? That is extremely easy to do.
And just a few minutes before the live show as well.
Yes, of course. Yeah, yes, right. Exactly right. Yeah, manipulating the set around, very, very simple with something like zero density. Adding something like a color corrector or triggering an animation, very simple to do. What else can I think of with regard to all of that? Or even the set. So for example, the way that zero density set up their pipeline here is it follows in many ways the pipeline of the Unreal Engine within the Unreal Editor itself. So for example, there's something called a post-process node. And on the post-process node, you can instantly adjust the set is needed. And I'll show clients this every time they come in. If they say, well, we're not sure about the lighting or the overall look, of the set itself, and I'll say, that's not a problem. We have a post-process node. And what that means is I can go in there and I can bring the brightness up. I can bring it down. I can change the color temperature of it very easily, right? If you want it to look more like outdoor light, like 56K or above, you can easily swing that. If you want it more like, indoor incandescent lighting, you can do that. So there's a lot of things within it, but they mimicked what you see within the Unreal Engine, which is nice. So anyone that's familiar with the Unreal Engine, they can go in there and understand it very quickly. But as you said a moment ago, during a shoot, if there's any question about something like that, which we do, sometimes we'll look at something on a project or two and we said, hey, I think that this can be just a little bit lower in terms of overall level. Well, if it were a real set, you'd have to get the lighting director and his team to bring all of those lights down. It would be, a much bigger process. With a post-process node like we have here, you can do that in half a second. So it's very easy to understand, and you can do it like the day of.
Yeah, and the photorealism is really unmatched because it is Unreal Engine native solution, and it creates the virtual environment not in a layer-based system, but inside the 3D environment. So the shadows, reflection, retractions, they're all there automatically, and it doesn't need extra effort. So it's the benefit of using the system as well.
And this will, and I'll just, Marim, if I could, I'll swing back to what I originally said earlier when I first met all my friends at Zero Density, that NAB we spoke about, is the level of realism was obvious, because what Zero Density did by building from the ground up a system that worked directly with the Unreal Engine, they were able to sort of get much closer to that engine itself, like you just said, whereby any resolution that was being lost by some of the other companies that were doing their own thing was now not a non-issue by building something straight up into the Unreal Engine. I immediately saw a realistic or a photorealistic set. The resolution was much better, and lighting and reflections, all of the things you just said become much more realistic as a result of it. So yeah, that's another thing. Yes.
Basically, this is the answer in short, by the way. You can check our website for more details. So let's see our final project, and I have more questions to ask you. And we will watch Media Access Awards, and we can talk over it.
Yes, and this is a synopsis, by the way. This is a very compressed version, as you'll see. I think the whole show was maybe an hour and a half or so. So in the interest of time, we cut it down to just a couple of bits here. But you can see that we're moving around to various parts of the set. We had a number of virtual monitors set up. This is the first one. These are some of the celebrities that took a part in this very important event. Here's another position you'll notice. We put virtual lighting on the wall. We emulated some virtual, notice the shadows behind her and her own shadow that's being picked up. This project, by the way, was shot in 4K, which made for very high resolution, a perfect key, and just an overall great look that the client was really very happy with. And there was some movement from our jib. This was shot with our jib.
Yeah, so let's take a look at the questions, because we have an understanding of the projects, and it's pretty straightforward, and it's the same formula that you have in your set, in your virtual studio. So what advice do you have for younger designers that are familiar with other 3D animation design softwares and looking into transition into the virtual production world using Unreal and Zero Density systems? What is your advice for them?
If they're looking to transition into virtual production, is that what we're asking?
Oh yeah, for virtual studio, they are using other 3D design systems and want to transition to Unreal Engine and Zero Density. So what is your advice to these designers?
Well, the first thing is, and you can speak about this even better than I can, Marim, is that Zero Density offers a community version, right, for Zero Density, which is a free version that anyone can download. I believe it's a plugin, and we also use it. We have a license with zero density, but we also use the community versions because we have several render engines here. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to have up to 3 designers working, at one given time, at the same time on our 3 different systems. And the community version allows us to do that. So the one bit of advice I would say to the designers out there would be to download the community version and start working with it. The process is, the applications that they're currently using, possibly their Autodesk products such as 3D Max or Maya, is if they're proficient with that, then after you've downloaded that community version, get used to importing your sets or your assets into the community version and start working with it. Start getting familiar with, the process of building your lighting and adjusting your textures and materials within the Unreal Engine. You'll have a vanilla version of the Unreal Engine and you'll be able to do all of that and get proficient at doing that. The other thing I would recommend is get proficient with blueprints, animating, doors opening, lights going on, books opening, as you saw from one of our examples, and get as familiar as you can with that. And there's lots and lots of sources that you can get. You can get some of those sources through zero density. The Facebook offers lots of virtual sites that you can go in and exchange information with other designers who are doing work with it. I think that would be a helpful thing as well.
Yeah, and what we hear from the industry, from our clients, there's this huge talent gap when it comes to Unreal Engine artists working in broadcast segments. So, and Unreal Engine has extensive tutorials in their own website to walk you through the game engine. And when Unreal Engine, Reality Editor doesn't have any learning curve, and to learn Reality Engine and Reality Hub, you may need a week, and you will be easily up to speed with everything. So it's definitely worth the time because of the talent gap, and I think it will be needed in the future.
If I may add, there are lots of forums on Facebook and other sites that you can join, for exchanging information with other talented designers out there. And as this grows, as I've been seeing since I've started, and that continues on, is this industry, specifically the television broadcast and cinema industry, is continuing to roll forward. Everybody's familiar with The Mandalorian and how they use the Unreal Engine, and other shows are picking up on that and doing the same things. And they're constantly looking for talent because lots of people do not have it yet. It is building, but I think those that get into it now have some pretty big opportunities, I think, in the next couple of years for jobs in whatever area of the industry they want, whether it's commercial work, corporate work, television production or cinema production. I think there's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, Unreal Engine will definitely be used more and more in the broadcast sphere, as well as live events, esports broadcast, even commercials started being done in virtual studios. So it's definitely needed skill. Yeah,
absolutely.
So let's check other questions. What remote head model and jib are you using? Someone is checking out your tech.
Oh boy. So the jib that we use is the Stanton Jimmy Jib Pro, and it's a great system. I highly recommend it. There are other systems and jibs out there, but Jimmy Jib and Stanton is a great product. They've been out for decades. They're very widely used in the in the broadcast and even in the cinema world, as I understand it, and it works great for us. Was there another question with regard to the jib there, or was it just?
Yeah, just that.
Yeah, okay.
And also people have noticed that you have one Reality Engine and 2 tracked cameras. So the question follows. Can you manage to use more than one camera with one render engine?
Yes, I believe I might have been the first one to do that. We can, and we have. And I've actually put 3 cameras on one system. It depends on how well you manage it. It depends on the size of the set that you're using. But if you manage a set as you build it, you can. We've had 2 4K cameras on one engine. We've done that, or 3 HD cameras on one, and it worked quite well when you manage it. And of course, a graphics card and the speed of the engine and all of that.
Yeah, the official response to that from Zero Density is it works, but we do not recommend it, and we definitely do not certify it. So you're on your own on that part, but Joe makes it work, so maybe you will too.
Yes.
Yeah, so these are all the questions I have and the community has, obviously. So thank you so much for joining us today, Joe. It was great seeing your studio and checking out your projects, which were distinct, but still have the same elements in it, of course, from the Virtual Studio creative side. So do you have any final words, or what do you see the industry going from now on regarding virtual production?
Well, I want to thank you very much for having me. And I see just great things ahead for both Zero Density and for production in general. I just see a ramping up of production as more and more people see this. And what I mean by that are producers, executive producers, directors, lighting directors. They see the advantages, and I get calls, lots of calls about this. And the possibilities are endless. You know, people understand, for example, this stage is a nice size, but it's not tremendous, that you can take a virtual set and you can make it as large as you want in the virtual world, right? You can have, huge street scenes. You can be in a very large virtual space that you couldn't possibly build in an average studio because of size constraints or even cost constraints. So those 2 things alone for the virtual world are very big, versus traditional production, and then there's the time element there too. To build a real big stage requires a crew of people, requires time, and if you're breaking it down after a shoot, where are you putting it? Our stuff goes right back into the computer. So there is no space requirements. With a real set, you need storage space, warehousing, and then there's transportation associated with that. You don't need to do that. So that's a real big deal for a lot of our clients. The cost constraints are tremendous for big sets, whereby for us, there are no additional costs if you go from a virtual space that might be 2,000 square feet versus 200,000 square feet, right? It's just virtual. We're working on something with a client, which is the size of a warehouse, and there's 4 floors to it. It doesn't matter, right? You could never do that. You'd need a Hollywood lot to do that in, using metal and wood and that sort of thing. So there's a big savings there. And the list goes on, but I think a lot more people are seeing that, and they've been coming to us, and the conversations get more and more interesting. And for those designers out there, once again, I think for you to put your efforts and focus in on this area, I think would be a very positive move for those that are interested, because I think that there will be a lot of possibilities right around the corner.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much again. We are looking forward to see more projects coming your way. And
Thanks
have a great week. Yeah, of course. See you next time.
Thank you all.
Take care.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.